There you go. Okay. So throughout this class, um, you'll be hearing a couple of stories. I try to share one story per class about my association with Ev, to paint a picture of how he was as a person, how he was as a scholar, how he was as a teacher, how he was as a researcher, publisher of books, networker, things like that. So I wanted to kind of, since I had the good fortune of being associated with him as a student first when I came from all the way from India. I talked to you about uh, how he was instrumental in recruiting me from India and bringing me here and making me the scholar that I am today. So he influenced a lot in my life, and he has a big impact on many other people's lives. As we can see, we have seen in the articles that we are going to read, and Haley is going to tell a little bit more about it after what I'm going to do in terms of elements of diffusion. So my idea with this biographical approach is to make Ev as a person alive, as a scholar back, and then understand him, and then through understanding him we can understand the theory. So more personalized approach to understanding a theory, as opposed to understand a theory just by theory itself. For example, crisis communication or conflict communication or any other kind of communication that you're understanding. Even with Julian Miravel, have you taken his class, the interpersonal communication and his positive com class? I mean, he talks a lot about his theory, but then the theorist is himself right here in front of us. Julian Miravel is the theorist. He's come up with a theory. You can't call it a theory as such because it's still a young theory. So it's kind of a framework, right? Positive communication, his model of positive calm, the 7 elements that are there. It's just a way of understanding what goes on in terms of building relationships. But you could go and look at Julian Merivel's life and understand how he came up, and he has a story. I think he tells you about how that model emerged. So there's always a story behind the theory. And many a times we don't look at the story, we just look at the theory itself and then move on, right? So it's just information, but there's always a context for the information. So let's jump into elements of diffusion. What are the key elements of diffusion? So let me share the PowerPoint. Here you go. So we're in this mode of defining diffusion, and it's a specialized kind of communication. Diffusion is a very specialized kind of communication. Like any other forms of communication, I mean, interpersonal communication, if you look at how we build relations, it's also a specialized kind of communication, but we do it between 2 individuals or 3 individuals, and it's interpersonal communication. Mass communication also is a specialized kind of communication, but diffusion more so. It's a paradigm in itself. So what is diffusion? Sorry. This is the PowerPoint that I made some time back. So it has all these elements of words jumping at you. It makes sound too. So that was the innovation at that time. It was hot way to do PowerPoint, I guess. So it's a process by which an innovation is communicated through certain channels. So it's a process by which an innovation is communicated through certain channels over time among the members of a social system. So that's the definition that Ev Rogers has come up with. And we can break it down further into each of these elements that are there. So last class, we talked about symbolic representation. And how important that was in terms of shaping the human being's trajectory of growth. Our ability to play around with symbols, human beings' ability to play around with symbols to represent one thing for another thing through a symbol, signifying an idea and then putting into a concrete symbol, is all about symbolic representation. So diffusion is much like that. It's a symbolic representation. In this context of communication, it is a process whereby a participant share information to reach a mutual understanding. So let's stop here a little bit, and maybe you can help me understand this last aspect, which is it's a process whereby participants share information to reach a mutual understanding. What does that mean to you? We can start with Haley. Haley, can you help us understand this last part?
Yeah, sorry, I was just rereading it again.
Sure. Take your time.
I think it's just like an exchange of information, where I think back to other theories that I've learned, and the context of sharing this information amongst each other, to reach the mutual understanding is what's so important, because of the fact that you're trying to reach that mutual understanding in the first place. I think it's about finding that common ground, that common level where you exchange information and you maybe argue or defend or whatever it may be, just so you can get to that state where you're both on the same page, or where you're all on the same page.
And that's the key there, that to be on the same page is the hard part. I mean, it's just not sharing information, but sharing information with the goal of mutual understanding. Because I can share information with you, and then you can completely reject it. So what good is that information, right? I mean, for you, if you're not agreeing to it, if there is no shared understanding of what that means for me, the same thing means for you, then obviously there's no. I mean, communication is basically a process of reaching a mutual understanding, a shared understanding, a mutual understanding. Any communication, but more so diffusion, I think. So yeah, good job, Haley. Good job. I think you got a good. You gave us a good understanding of that. What about Sarah? Do you want to add to it?
I would say pretty much everything that Haley Grace said, but also I would add that the part about reaching a mutual understanding, it's really just about being like on the same page. Maybe is like another way to say that, but basically to get there you do have to diffuse that information. Like it has to get from point A to point B for there to be that cohesion.
For example, if you're trying to diffuse something that you have, I mean, in your professional life, I think you write a story. And
Yeah,
then,
so you ask when you ask for clarification, or when you ask for like further explanation, um, that's like a really common one I think in my line of work, is just asking for even example during like when people are speaking, so you can get a real feel for what they're saying and not just what words come out first, because sometimes people don't know how to verbalize exactly what they're saying in a way that makes sense to a large group of people.
right. So yeah, there's a lot going on when you put that aspect of shared understanding, shared meaning making. Even though the symbols have this ability of um, getting confusion, because when we're trying to communicate something, we are using symbols, and symbols are abstract. Symbols are representing something. They're not really concrete that you can lift it and you pass one stone from to another. The stone, maybe if you're passing a stone, then you know that this is a stone, and you have that stone and you give it to some other person, that the other person has the stone in their hands. But symbols is not stone. So in the process of handing over one symbol to another person in another person's hand, that symbol loses a lot of meaning or gains a different meaning. And so to bring about that shared understanding is the complex part. It helps you. I mean, symbolic representation really is good because no other animals are able to do it. They are not able to represent something, concrete thing in a abstract form, and then the other animal can understand it. So it has some advantages and it has some disadvantages, and that's where I think communication is complex, because it's not just information passing, it is creating the shared meaning, the coordinated meaning making theory that you might have learned in other classes. So diffusion is no different. It has the same issues going on. It really becomes problematic because you're trying to create a shared meaning. So let's let's get into this idea here. So what is diffusion? Diffusion is a special type of communication in which messages are mostly about new ideas, and this new idea term is defined by F. Rogers in more longer terms in chapter 1 and chapter 2. So it's a special type of communication that involves new ideas. What is a new idea? That's something that is as simple as, something new might be existing, not new to the whole system, but it might be new to a person. So even something that I don't know, and then you come and tell me something new, that becomes a new idea, even though I think you knew it. So you can define these concept of new idea from different ways, but it's actually innovation. It's actually a new way to do things, new understanding of how the world works, or it could be a new tool, a new concrete idea or technology. So on one hand, it could be a new innovation like iPhone, for example, a new phone that comes out, or it could be a new idea, a new social idea of changing the world. So it gets abstract. All the ideas that have that change the world basically are social ideas, and they're not concrete, they're not tools, they're abstract things, but eventually they change the world. So give a little thought about what this new idea means, and also read about what Ev Rogers talks about it. But anytime you have the new idea, then you have what he calls as uncertainty. The newness of the idea gives diffusion its special character, because any new idea comes with a degree of uncertainty. So you have the new idea, and then you have attached to the new idea, there's always uncertainty. So diffusion is a process of removing that uncertainty from this new idea. Essentially, I think that's what Ev Rogers used to tell me, that the whole art and science of diffusion is, first of all, deal with the idea, create a shared meaning, but also that shared meaning is difficult to create because there is a lot of uncertainty with any new idea, any new thing that is coming up. What is uncertainty? Well, it is the degree to which a range of alternatives are perceived with regard to the occurrence of an event. So if you break it down, like we saw in the Edison video, even the light bulb, logically thinking, it will say, well, it's nice and good, but people were thrown off because they didn't like it. So uncertainty is mostly associated with lack of predictability, and so that aspect needs to be somehow managed if you want to become the uncertainty needs to be handled before you can make diffusion possible. So you'll see more of that coming up in the following chapters that we have. So as I said, diffusion means reducing uncertainty. It's the dissemination of uncertainty, reducing information embodied in ideas, thoughts, products, or processes through a social system. So there's a lot going on here.
Yeah, what's that in English?
Say that again, sorry, Steve.
I said, what is that in English?
So in English, it is basically it's basically managing the risks, in your language, Steve, the risks of a new idea. Because any new idea, any new tool, any new thing brings about risks, right? Brings about uncertainty, basically. So like if you have GPS, like you were talking about, Steve, earlier in the example, or a calculator. I mean, your friend took the calculator and he was trying to, 3 days he was working on the calculator just to say that, it's not good, it's not helpful, it's problematic and all of that. So because that guy was not sure, uncertain about this new thing, about the risks involved with using that stuff. So like tomorrow, if you're a leader and all these people who are trying to bring about social changes, if you have a new idea and you propose the new idea to the larger people in the society, people are like, well, everything is going on well. We have a system right now which is going on and everything is fine, and we don't want to change over to a new system. So for example, in your organization, if there's a new software introduced, a new way of doing things, a new organization culture is introduced, most of the employees will say, oh no, we don't want to, let's just stick to what we have. We just do whatever is needed to be done, continue to do what we're doing, and not have this new thing. I don't think anybody stands up and says, "Oh, okay, let's try it and see what happens." So we have different things, with changes. With change, I think human beings are inherently, I don't want to say opposed to change, but really not open to change. If given a chance, they just want to like, okay, let's just do. I mean, even though in the Western world, um, in the Eastern cultures, it's also a cultural thing, like the modern Western world is open to new ideas, and it is like a stereotype that the Eastern cultures are closed-minded and not open to new ideas. So there's a whole bunch of things going on. How does culture impact diffusion? How does personality? Some people are more open-minded, risk-taking. Some people are not, and all that stuff comes out into when we go into Ev's theory there. So there's a bunch of things about reducing uncertainty and what is uncertainty in itself. Does it help to understand the definition of diffusion? Okay, so let's move on. Diffusion then is a process where an innovation is communicated to certain channels over time among members of a social system. So this definition still holds good. It is found in chapter 1, first chapter. Ev Rogers defines it, and he has changed this. In the first edition, if you look at the definition of diffusion, there was certain things that were added and subtracted. So this diffusion is a very refined one that he had come up with after lots of data was gathered about how things work, how different elements work. And so this is the latest one, which has not changed a whole lot. So it has these elements that are there. So if you look at the 4 elements, he came up with these 4 elements over a period of time. He started adding these and making the definition more concrete as he gathered more data and as he saw more innovations being diffused in the society. So for diffusion to happen, he says there has to be an innovation. It needs to be, it's a communication process, so it has to be certain channels. You can't do diffusion without any channels. Or can you? I mean, that according to him, communication channels is one big element. And then the factor of time also is very influential in the process of diffusion. Sometimes it takes forever for one idea to be diffused. And sometimes it's just one idea takes off quickly. So if it's taking a whole lot of time, then is diffusion even happening? That's a question that we need to ask sometimes. And then the last one is diffusion happens among the members of social system. So what are your reactions with these 4 elements? Make sense? You can take any innovation in your life and see how it has diffused, and you will see all of these happening, all these 4 elements present in that diffusion. Now, for a long time, I think towards the 3rd edition or 2nd edition of the book, the time was a big factor because innovations took a lot of time to diffuse. And we'll see the whole concept of S-curve has come out because Ev Rogers defined diffusions in terms of the time that they spread. And he did a lot of mathematics and found out this S curve that it takes in terms of statistical analysis, every diffusion follows a S curve. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that one later on. But if you can know, if you define diffusion, please include all these 4 elements that are there. And then he goes on to define each of these 4 elements. So innovation basically is an idea or an object or a practice that is perceived as new by that individual or the unit of adoption. So it doesn't mean that the innovation has to be brand new in that sense that the whole system doesn't know about it. As long as the individual or the person who's adopting it doesn't know about that idea, then still it's a new innovation for that person. So for example, I am from the field of communication. I'm not so much into other things. I'm kind of a late adopter when it comes to technology. So like, my neighbor was telling me yesterday that when you go to Sam's Club, nowadays, most of the people are having the app on the phone, Sam's Club app, and then you can scan everything and then check. You don't you when you go to a store, basically, he was telling me that you can download the app, and then you go to the aisles and you take scan the item in your phone, and then when you come to the checkout, they can check you out quickly. Do you guys do that? I'm still the old-fashioned, like I put everything and then one by one scan everything at the end of it, and it takes time apparently, and then finally I'm checked out. I pay the bill and then I come out. That's what I was doing. So this is not new, I guess. This idea is not new of scanning stuff and using the app. I mean, Amazon really changed all of that stuff. But for me, it's still a new idea. So from my perception, for my individual, it's a practice, it's a new idea, it's a new practice, it's a new object, because I'm not adopted it. If you're not adopted any idea, then it's still new to you, right? Even though the world is adopted, but you're not adopted, so it still is a new idea to you. That makes sense. The first element of what is an innovation, it needs to be perceived as new by the individual. That's the key thing here. Cool, any questions? No? Okay, so then innovation always has uncertainty, so that's I told a little bit about that already, and we're going to go detail into that. Innovation decision process is where the next element kind of comes in. Every innovation has elements of uncertainty, and so you use the whole model of innovation decision to reduce the uncertainty. That's all part of innovation. The second element is communication channels. Well, this is where the messages get from one individual to another individual. The channels is basically depend on the nature of information exchange, and the source, how the source is transmitting that information, and how the receiver is receiving that information. Kind of what Haley Grace said about creating a common understanding there. So communication channels do that. So what are the big communication channels? Mass media is still a big channel, and mass media doesn't mean the traditional mass media that we have, the television and radio and newspaper and all of that. But now mass media is really, the definition of mass media has changed to include social media, artificial intelligence and all kinds of. So if you're spreading your idea through YouTube, that's a communication channel right there. If you're spreading your idea through Snapchat, maybe some of you might do a diffusion project where you use a communication channel, which is technology-based channel, social media. But it also could be the old-fashioned interpersonal channels, which is mouth-to-mouth, word-of-mouth communication. That's the best, I think, way to spread or diffuse. It's the best communication channel that you have, which is interpersonal, word-of-mouth channel. So these are two basically big channels that are there: interpersonal and mass media. There are others, maybe we can talk about it later, but they have their own advantages and disadvantages. Then we have, lastly, the social system. So this is where it gets complicated, because social system has a lot of things going on. As you can see, any society, any group of people will have various levels, various layers of, we can break down a society into age group, the social demographic variables, but also culture, also awareness, education, all kinds of things, gender. So the social system is the complex part, that's where the targeting of diffusion happens, where nowadays tailoring, what you call as specific tailored messages, are diffused to specific people. And we have come to a stage where Amazon.com and these other online agencies have really perfected the art of breaking down the social system and identifying each member personally rather than part of a social system. So, are you able to follow the last element? This is the most complex one, I feel. Well, all four are complex, but this one is even more complex. Okay, so you combine all these four elements together and you have diffusion. Under the social system, you have, as I was telling you, the structure of the system, the norms of the system, and the people who are in the system. Some of them are opinion leaders, some of them are just adopters. All of that kind of comes into view. So social structure is very, very complex, and some of the elements that come here, as I have explained. The later part of the book kind of deals with social networks and social structure. So the book, if you read it, you'll find Evrod just kind of tackles each element in different chapters as you go along. And I think towards the end of the book, it's more social networks. So those are the main elements of diffusion. It gives you a broad framework of how diffusion is. We're trying to, in the second week of classes, we're trying to just understand what is diffusion. And then we'll go into each and every element even more in depth. So I'm going to stop here and see if you have any questions.
The only question I can think of, we were talking about these presentations to begin with. What are the dates of these presentations again, and what are they supposed to entail?
You mean the article presentations or the?
Yes, sir.
In
The article presentation.
Article presentation, okay. So yeah, so today I'm going to tell you 1 week in advance, or maybe a couple of weeks in advance, when your turn is. I think it's in the syllabus. I try to lay it down. So if you look at the syllabus and you go to tentative agenda, today is what Haley Grace article presentation day. And I think in a couple of weeks, maybe it's Sarah, or I have to look into the but there is what article you need to present and what day, all that is mentioned. And I'm going to kind of remind you that too. Next week, of course, we are not meeting because of Labor Day. So Monday is a holiday, but in a couple of weeks we'll come back, and I think I want to say either it's Sarah or you who's going to present an article on 9/11 and how the news of 9/11 diffused. But I'll remind you for sure. I'll give you heads up on that. So, any other questions before Haley Grace does her presentation? Any other questions? No? Well, then just let's get into the final aspect of the class on the agenda. That is, she's going to tell you a little bit about what her readings are from the articles that were written about Ev Rogers. So all yours.
Yeah.
If you want to have to share your screen or have a
Yes, is
PowerPoint,
there a way I can share my screen?
I think you should be able to.
Okay, perfect. I see it. Okay. Can you all see it?
Yes. It's
Okay.
loading.
It's loading.
It's loading for me.
Okay. For some reason, sometimes when I go to actual slideshow, it says that it's loading. Can you see it now?
Now I can see it. Yes.
Okay, I may just have to stay on this page and show it to you from this way rather than going to the full slideshow. For some reason, my computer glitches when I go to the full slideshow sometimes.
This is fine.
Okay. All right, so this is the life and work of Ev Rogers. So I wanted to start off with a quote. So if you want to know how to succeed in the complicated process of diffusion of innovations, you can go beyond Everett Rogers' justly famed book of that name and look at the man and the way he lived. And that's from Thomas Backer. And my introduction is, my name is Haley Mills, and I'm a second-year MA student at Euler studying communication and conflict resolution or mediation. I'm able to give this presentation to you today because of the experience I've had in the program, thanks to the wonderful professors that I've had. So a little bit about Ev Rogers. Ev's blend of scientific knowledge and direct experience was potent, in part because of his unvarnished enthusiasm for what he'd experienced himself. So he had gone through a lot in his own life, and he had experienced a lot in his own life. And because of that, it directly correlated with his own scientific knowledge and his own scientific capacity for learning new things. In the most general sense, Ev both believed and demonstrated in his work and life the importance of the human element when turning ideas into action. So he was very much involved in connections and networking and making sure that the human life was focused on. And I think that that was really important to him in his work and his life, both so. So Ev Rogers' work. Questions were being asked about why some farmers adopted these innovations while others did not, and also why it took such a long time for these seemingly advantageous innovations to diffuse. This is about some of the work that he did in his studies. These questions intrigued the young Ev Rogers. These questions about innovation diffusion, including the strong resistances and how they could be overcome, formed the core of Ev's graduate work at ISU. His doctoral dissertation was the study of diffusion of weed spray and involved interviewing more than 200 farmers about their adoption decisions. So he was very involved in his upbringing and what kind of effect that had on him growing up in a farm. And it led and bled into his personal life as in adulthood. When the first edition of Diffusion of Innovations was published, Ev was an assistant professor of rural sociology at Ohio State University. He was 30 years old, but he was also becoming a world-renowned academic figure. The book, now in its 5th edition, is today the second most cited book in the social sciences. And I think that may be a little dated because you have said that it's now the most cited book in the social sciences. So either way, Ev is a highly regarded figure in the social sciences world and has made a huge impact on it and has been deeply impacted and affected by his upbringing and his childhood as well as his academia. Some of the most noteworthy things that I noticed about him were his networking abilities, and his jump to action when things were happening. So there were a lot of times that colleagues wrote about him going to events just after they had occurred and researching them on the ground right after they had occurred. And that happened in multiple instances. So there was, for instance, a major cultural event that took place, that he jumped to the event and left his students behind and then returned a week later with his research and his knowledge in hand and ready to share all of that new information with them. And I think that is just so cool and so important to who he is as a person, because he was just always ready to leap at the opportunity to learn and to grow himself as a human being. And it seemed like he was just yearning for more knowledge and more research and more to add to his capabilities. So one of the other things that really intrigued me was something called the strength of weak ties, which one of his colleagues wrote about him, which basically in their words says, what matters most is not the quantity of branches in the network, but rather the strength of the network. In this way, the influential power of communication is increased. And I think this really speaks to his networking abilities, because it talks about how important it was for him to have a strong network of people and how much he reached out to make sure that he was reaching a diverse group of people and that he was influencing them along the way as well as being influenced by them along the way. And so I think that was really important to him, and I think that's really important to understand about him. But that is it. That is my presentation. And I will stop sharing now.
Well, thank you, Hurley. You did a good picture of Ev Rogers. You focused on a couple of his abilities, the networking, the constant learner that he is. So, I guess you guys don't have personal contact with him. He was an amazing person, as you can see, as you can read in the articles. Haley and Grace, I think all the articles that you read, you can see the passion that the colleagues that describe him. You know, in nowadays, not many people have such good words for other people. But I guess he just won the hearts of many people through his friendships, through his helping attitude. I think he was ready to help, especially students. He cultivated a band of students all across the world. You can go. I mean, his effect is now fading out because it's been about 18 years since he passed away. But when he was alive, you could see he could walk into a conference, the International Communication Association or the National Communication Association conference, and it's like the movies. Ev Rogers used to be followed by 20, 30 students. Wherever he goes, that was his charisma. That was not something because he was a famous person, but people just gravitated, got attracted to him because of his nature that he was. He was just a simple, down-to-earth guy. You can communicate with him, even though he's a big scholar, but you can communicate with him at his level. And he just helped people a lot. I mean, he helped a lot of students, gave them new ideas, directed their read dissertations, including mine, and helped them grow as teachers and researchers, and the whole field now. In many ways, he's passed away, but his research continues even now. So I'm glad that you got a sense of this guy who he was through his articles. I think I will recommend both Sarah and Steve to also read some of his stuff, and then as you read the book itself, you'll see some of his work that is coming. He's written a whole lot of books, even including a history of communication. He just used to write all the time. You see him, even if he's attending meetings, he's writing stuff. I don't know how he managed to publish 40 books. I guess he was constantly working late into the night, in the early morning. Then he was gardening. Then he was flying around, conducting research. He was just an amazing man, and I'm so glad, so fortunate that I was touched by his life, and I was able to meet him. So that's why I think I spent a whole lot of time in the first class talking about him, and I'm taking this biographical approach because he's just a unique guy. So we'll, uncover some of his other aspect of his personality, and if you get a chance yourself, Google him, or find stuff from his life and try to relate to what we are learning in the class. So that's all I have got, I think, today. Pretty much we're just going to get started, and then we're going to yes, Haley.
I was just going to ask if you could clarify again when the discussion posts are due.
Well, it is that week. It is a week after it's opened up, week or
Okay.
10 days. There's no actually clear. I mean, I see it as an ongoing discussion.
Okay.
So when the topic is hot, we're discussing it for that week and a few days later, and then we move on to the second discussion post. So I keep it open so that you can keep adding it. I mean, sometimes something comes to your mind and you say, oh, I need to. So there's no like a time frame there. The time frame that I'm looking is just the 10 days. A
Okay.
little bit before it starts and little after it ends.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
And so you can upload that PowerPoint and also talk about it there. And I'm going to do the same thing there. Okay, any other questions? All right, then I think we can end here. We almost on time here. And then we're going to take a little break. So have a good Labor Day weekend. If you're traveling, be safe, and then enjoy. And then we'll come back in a couple of weeks.
Thank you. Enjoy the holiday.